it gives me great pleasure to introduce Scott Spradling from the Spradling Group. I'm a little nervous because I don't see our moderator. Oh, Scott, thank you. Oh, I thought I just became the moderator. It's so nice to see you, Scott. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Spradling.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. In many, many ways, it seems like it's been a long time since we've done this exercise because it's a somewhat familiar one with familiar faces, but in a lot of ways, it also feels just like yesterday. Let's get right to it. For those of you who don't remember, my name is Scott Spradling. I am now a member of the LLC crowd, so I'll be listening intently to some answers tonight. But let's get right to the introduction of our special guests, and we'll have our Q&A portion between the party chairs. It is my pleasure to welcome the state's chairman of the New Hampshire Democratic Party, Mr. Ray Buckley. And it is an equal honor to introduce the state's chair of the Republican Party of New Hampshire, Mr. John Sununu.
We had to hold the microphone and share it. We're moving on up.
We know you like to talk with your hands, so we've gone with the clip mics. We'll give a chance once they're on. You all set, Governor?
I'm all set.
All right. So this is loosey-goosey. We want to give you a chance to ask some questions. So as you're hearing some of the topics, we want you to ask a few as well. But we're going to start things off with opening statements, and we will begin with Governor Sununu.
Well, thank you very much for letting us come back and repeat. It's about 210 days to the election, 7 months, 30 weeks. And I think it's an important election. You always hear every election is important. I think this one's especially important because as we see what's happened in the country and as we see what's happened in our state, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say a lot of people who voted for the people that are in control now are rather upset at what happened. There's a legend that you shouldn't get too partisan about things. You shouldn't get too political. That business organizations have not the obligation or should not impose a political perspective on the issues as they come down. Well, that's okay if you believe that policy is truly, absolutely nonpartisan. I think what's happened in this country in the last year and what's happened in this state in the last 5 years should wake the business community of New Hampshire up, and you should tell yourself, we must do something to reverse the downtrend that we've gone through. Let me tell you where you are. If you go to the Pew Foundation website, you'll see that in the last half dozen years, we've gone from a state that had high-quality services to being a state that is now ranked 50th in terms of the quality of our state services. If you take a look at the environment, the tax environment, the economic environment for small business, we now have an economic environment for small business in which their tax burden is worse than Massachusetts. If you look at the census data for the last 3 years, for the first time in ages, in each of the last 3 years, more people are moving out of the state of New Hampshire than are moving in. And if you take a look at what was done in the legislative cycle last time, as the legislature and the governor, the democratically controlled legislature and Democratic Governor John Lynch, played around with a budget, denying that they had to cut spending, and once again, increasing spending. When you compare that to what the states around the country have done On average, they cut their budgets 2.5%. And their previous budget, they cut 2.2%. And what did we do in New Hampshire? In the last budget, we raised it about 8%, and the budget before that, 17%. There is no need to go on a spending spree when all the businesses and all the families in our state have to cut back. To add insult to injury, when Sherm Packard, the Republican leader in the House, and Peter Bragdon, the Republican leader in the Senate, suggested spending cuts, the governor said, we don't need spending cuts in any way. You have to tell us what you want to cut. And when they said you ought to have a cut across the board, he mocked them. But now we're about to go into an election cycle. And Governor Lynch is doing what he did in the last election cycle. After going on a spending spree with the budget, he now wants to sound like a Republican again, and he's talking about cutting spending. And you know how he suggested to do it? He wants to cut across the board. He should have done it in the budget. It is late now, and when you are late, you don't get all the savings. It is unbelievable how the attractiveness of this state has changed. We used to be a growth state. We had the highest growth rate east of the Mississippi for a while. We were on the northern edge of Megapolis, and everybody was coming here. They are moving out now. Small businesses are moving out. The 41 taxes that were increased or imposed in the last cycle are chasing jobs out of this state. It is time the business community smartened up. If you think there is no difference between the two parties, you have a real problem. If you think just because John Lynch campaigns and sounds like a Republican, and then you ignore the fact that he spends like a drunken sailor, then you have a problem. If you ignore the fact that the refuge of the high spenders is to talk about double taxing big business by removing the BET credit and taxing you both on a business enterprise tax and a business profits tax, you have a problem. And if you don't understand how bad a tax the LLC tax was, then you have a problem. You cannot tolerate spending and then be upset at one or two little taxes. You must stand up and demand that this state be run in a business-like way. You have to demand that when costs have to be cut, they should be cut early. You have to ask that programs be examined. You have to ask that waste be looked at. You have to ask that department heads be pressured to manage tightly. And you can't let leadership in the House tell the governor what his budget's going to be and then have a governor that refuses to lead and just takes whatever spending package of cookies that comes down and accepts it. This is too great a state to not make the change in November that's necessary. New Hampshire used to be an attractor because of its high-quality workforce, because of its tax climate, because of its quality of life. There used to be a beloved governor in this state that used to say this was a great state to live in, to raise a family, and do business in. Things have changed dramatically. It is a state in which more people are moving out than moving in. I really ask the business community, stand back, recognize policy does have partisan flavors. And just because people sound like Republicans when they run doesn't mean that you can ignore the fact that when they practice and execute, they are nowhere near being Republicans in what they do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. Mr. Buckley?
Thank you, and I enjoyed coming to these dinners as a member of the legislature for many years, and now for the last 3 years as the state party chair. And I enjoy being with Governor Sununu. I served in the House when he was governor, and he is always full of enthusiasm. Might be wrong enthusiasm, but he's got his enthusiasm. There's something I was disappointed because Governor Sununu has been going around the state for the last year and a half saying the state of New Hampshire is ruined. Well, and he didn't say it tonight, so I had to do it for you. The reality is we are, per capita, the 4th least taxed state in the country. Per capita, the 5th least expenditure by state government per person in the state of New Hampshire. We are the healthiest state. We are the best state to raise children, best for education. In fact, just today, for the 3rd year in a row, we were named the safest state in the nation. And I could go on and on and on. The list is very lengthy of where we are still number 1, 2, or 3, certainly far above anything in the eastern part of the state of New Hampshire. I'm very proud of this state. I'm very proud of the work that people have worked together in a bipartisan way for many years. I do want to make reference to one of Governor Sununu's point, the Pew Foundation. What he doesn't mention is one of the arguments of why we're number 50 is because we have a 400-member House, because we have the Executive Council, because our commissioners don't serve at the whim of a strong governor, that we have a 2-year governor's term. Go through that, go onto the line and find out why we're number 50. It has to do with the government that we, as the people of the state of New Hampshire, have chosen to have. I think that we are surviving this economic downturn, although it's nationally. You can see across the country states in significantly tougher positions. And I do think that this governor and this legislature has been responsible. What Governor Sununu fails to mention when he talks about the 2 different proposals for across-the-board cuts. Last year's across-the-board cuts included revenue sharing and money to the communities. I don't think, Mr. Mayor, that you would have appreciated $40 to $50 million cut out of the money going to the city of Manchester this year. Your budget would have been a little impossible to do. And these cuts, that although the governor is calling them across the board, the monies going to New Hampshire's communities are off the table. I think that's a very important distinction between those two proposals. I think that what we've seen in Washington this past year and a half, where there has been a lockstep no matter what, Congresswoman Shea Porter was polite in not outing the people who even sponsored that piece of legislation that she referred to. Of the 7, half of them were actually sponsors of it, but because President Obama endorsed it, they backed away and were against it. And we're seeing the same sort of behavior here in the state of New Hampshire. And I think that is shameful. Many of you know I served for nearly 20 years in the minority. One of the first things I ever learned was that you had to work together. And unfortunately, that teamwork, that sense that we're all in this together, has failed us this past year and a half, where people who decide that they were angry and bitter about what happened in 2008, and they were going to continue the campaign right through the legislative session, both in Washington and here. I would hope that as we're addressing these cuts, as we're addressing turning the economy around, that people take off their partisan hat and they roll up their sleeves and work together. I think that would be in the best interest of the people of New Hampshire. I think that's why you all ran. I think that's why you're here who are business leaders. I think that by working together, I think there, as Speaker Sytek used to say, there are no good Republican ideas or good Democratic ideas. There's just good ideas. And if we all work together, we can continue to move through here. And I know Governor Sununu likes to talk about Governor Lynch and his popularity. I mean, I would not want his job right now. When I saw poll after poll where 50% of the membership of my political party support the governor of the other side, I too would be a little frustrated. But it is amazing that Governor Lynch, closing in on his 3rd term, the most popular governor in the state in America right now, where governors across the country are at 20%, 15%. some of the best are at 30% approval ratings. And here's Governor Lynch in the mid-60s. I think that shows that the people of New Hampshire respect him and they respect his leadership. And I believe that better days are ahead because of some of the sound decisions that have been made these last couple of years, and we're going to make it through this historic downturn in a much better shape than any of the other states.
John, let me ask you both the same question.
May I make a correction? Because I think it's important. We used to be number one in terms of lowest taxes per capita, except for the anomaly of Alaska's gas revenue. We were number one. I find it disingenuous to come and brag about being fourth or fifth now. I think that just proves that the Democrats are ruining the state of New Hampshire. Number two, the Pew Foundation does include what Mr. Buckley talked about, but we've always had that. And so when we were in the top quarter or the top half in terms of quality of services, we carried that burden then as well. And what we have seen in the last 5 years is we have moved from that level to 50th in the nation. You don't have things change in such a way that you're getting worse and worse and then stand up and claim that somehow you've done something good. It is those statistics that he cites that I give you as evidence as to what's happening to this state.
Okay, let me jump into the first question. Chairman Buckley, I'll throw this to you, but it's a question for both of you. We're in an election year. The election cycle is about to start to amp up. Elections tend to center around a fundamental question. And my question to you is, what do you believe the 2010 elections' fundamental question will be from voters to those who are running for office?
Well, I think there are two combinations. One, who made promises and kept their promises, and two, competence. And if you compare the list of promises that were made by President Obama, by Governor Lynch, and the Democratic majorities both in Washington and here, you will see that by and large, as much as can be expected in this sort of economic downturn, they've addressed these issues. And I think that things are even going to be better as we get closer to the election. The second is competence. While Governor Lynch has led the state through the worst economic times in any of our lifetimes, because I suspect that, well, I don't know, maybe Mayor Dupuy was around during the Depression, but I don't think many others.
You'll get 2 minutes for rebuttal here.
He knows it's true. And then who do the Republicans run for governor but Johnny Stephen? I mean, here's a guy who, while at the Department of Safety, doubled the department's budget. While he was at Health and Human Services, lost $70 million. Lost it. Didn't know where it went. Couldn't find it for months. Had no idea where it was. And then left the department with a nearly $500 million deficit. If that's who is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party for governor, clearly this argument is going to be about competence.
Mr. Sununu?
Yeah. I think the fundamental issue in 2010 is going to be arrogance. The arrogance of a president who says, I know better what health care package the American public needs, and I don't care that 55 to 58% of the public doesn't like it. You're going to get my package and like it. The arrogance of a governor in the state of New Hampshire who stands up and tells people he cares about taxes and then lets taxes get lifted across the board by a legislature, never provides any leadership to stop it, expresses concern but never threatens a veto and lets it come through. It is about competence as well. It is about the fact that this state has been mismanaged. It is about the fact that even the Democrats in the state Senate and the Democrats in the House here wonder sometimes which direction the governor wants to go in. That's not leadership. That's not even followership. That's wishy-washy. Nice is not enough. You've got to manage. And in this state, we have not had any management or leadership or direction or commitment to efficiency in government or any commitment to cut spending, or any focus on reducing taxes, or any focus on improving the economic climate of this state to attract jobs. You know what our jobs program is? We're paying people unemployment while they're drawing a salary. Now that may sound very generous, but it doesn't take much of a business head to understand the mischief that comes from that kind of a policy. That's not policy, that's not leadership, that's trying to buy votes in an election cycle. In the last election cycle, after they raised the budget 17% and said there was nothing that could be cut, about this time of year in that election cycle, the Democrats started talking about they might do some cuts. After raising this budget 8% and saying nothing could be cut, we are now in an election cycle, and the vote buying is back again, and people are saying we might be able to cut. We need leadership when it counts. We don't need arrogance in Washington. We don't need incompetence here. We need a change in 2010.
Governor, on the issue of health care, politically, how do you believe it will benefit the Republican Party going towards November, given that we are standing here at the beginning of April and voters absolutely pay attention? We all understand that. But voters also have summer. They have jobs. They have families. They have distractions. They have life between now and that time. How do you make, from the Republican perspective, and Chairman Buckley, it's sort of have the opposite argument, how do you make health care a winner for you for November?
Well, there are some things, some reforms in health care that Republicans proposed that are good pieces of the legislation. And the Republicans ought to focus on the fact that they will retain those, that is part of the reform package they put together. But Scott, if what you have suggested is true, then that question should go to Mr. Buckley. Because right now, 55 to 58% of the Americans oppose the health care plan. And if they're not going to pay attention again until November, that means going into November, 55 to 58% are still going to be upset at the arrogance of the Democrats in trying to shove that package down their throat. Now they're changing their language. We have Mr. Hodes running around trying to call it a jobs bill. It's a jobs-killing bill. The only jobs it's going to create is 16,000 IRS agents that are going to come knocking at your door. It is a bill that tucks it to the young people in America. Tucks it to the young people in America. It takes the 12 million young people who are uninsured, and it says, we have news for you, you're going to pay. You're going to pay either between $2,000, $3,000, or $4,000, or you're going to pay a fine. And we have our IRS agents around to make sure you pay the fine. The young people of America are going to wake up in this cycle between now and 2010 and discover the whole way that you even come close to paying for a lot of this bill is to take that money out of the pockets of people under 35 who up until now have chosen not to be insured. But the last point is an important one. People are going to resent being treated as not very smart by this president. And this president and the Democrats in Congress are going around telling us that this bill pays for itself, hoping that you are not smart enough to understand that they have 10 years of income balancing against 6 years of spending. And that's how you balance the first decade. And they hope that you're not smart enough to notice.
Chairman Buckley, the politics of health care.
The bill that was signed into law by the president was essentially the Republican proposal in 1993. So if you look at what the alternative to what the Clinton administration had proposed in 1993, and you look at what the Republicans proposed as an alternative, essentially that's what was passed this year. When the governor repeats stories that were discredited all across the news media a week ago about the IRS agents as being a flat-out untruth, again, he repeats them. So it's kind of hard to debate somebody who just kind of repeats stories that he heard. The reality is that this bill, this law, I believe, will be very successful And even the Republicans. Remember, in the first 24 hours, it was like repeal and replace. You don't hear that anymore. Because despite the poll that Governor Sununu might mention, even the partisan Republicans in Washington know that at the end of the day, this is a good deal for the people of America. And I'd just like to quote Mitt Romney, because I know some of you really like him and wanted him to be president. When Mitt Romney signed a similar bill, his response is, well, I know some of my libertarian friends are upset that you're going to have to pay into this. But the choice is, if you're going to provide affordable and accessible health care, it's either going to come from two ways: the people getting or increased taxes. And he sided, when he signed that Massachusetts bill, into increasing for those who were uninsured to a level so that everybody in Massachusetts were able to be insured. So I think that when you look at, one thing was very clear with the health care. Prior to that, were people, Democratic State Party chairs all across the country, a little anxious about this election? You bet. Poll after poll showed that 75% of the Republican base were all excited about going out to vote in 2010. And to many of us who were around in 1994, it's like, oh my God, it's deja vu all over again. Because what happened in 1994 wasn't that Republicans had this big tsunami, voters coming in. What it was is the Democrats sat home. A poll, because they were frustrated that the Clinton administration was not able to pass health care and a number of other proposals. A poll was taken within a couple days of the president signing this bill. And while the excitement of the Republican base stayed at 75%, that same poll said that 76% of the Democratic base was very excited about voting this November. So I think it was a complete game changer. I think the president is going to be supported and look back in history. I know that there were those who were against Social Security. There were those who were against Medicaid. There were those against Medicare. There were those against any Civil Rights Act. I mean, can you imagine anyone now standing up being opposed to those proposals? Not too many. And I think that when we look back at this, this piece of legislation will be in history with them as well as one of the finest moments in our country's history.
Chairman Buckley, governor's races around the country in the last number of months or so have broken Republican. Special elections in New Hampshire have broken Republican. You've got the Scott Brown sensation, if you will, that has been a headliner in politics since he was elected. The president campaigned against Scott Brown, and Martha still lost. Do you fear that going into this fall, that this is a sign of bigger things to come on Election Day?
Absolutely not. I think I just addressed it. What was happening, whether in Massachusetts or in New Jersey or Virginia or in, frankly, some of these races, although I will point out that we had never even held either one of these state Senate seats in the history of New Hampshire. So, although I congratulate David and Jeb for winning them, we certainly wanted to win them, the likelihood that we were going to pick up those state Senate seats was very slim. The reality is that all those were taken, those elections were held prior to the signing of the health care bill. I would suggest that if we look at if there are not going to be any more special elections in New Hampshire, nor I think too often, but I think that the numbers are going to change dramatically. That the Democratic base, who sat home in those two state Senate districts and in a couple of the House races, who sat home in Virginia and sat home in New Jersey, I think that they are now electrified. They're excited. The increase of fundraising by our candidates, by the parties across the country, has been significant.
What do you think the president's impact on Election Day will be? His personal favorability is still high, as you point out. His job approval rating has dropped because of the health care debate.
Well, it kind of depends on what poll you look at, and polls are a snapshot of that one day, as we are all told. I even saw a poll in 1984 that had Chris Spiro beating John Sununu. So
must have been your poll.
Well, everyone I knew was voting for Spiro.
They both did.
But I think that, in all seriousness, I think that there are many polls that show a significant change in the climate and the dynamic, and I know you'll see other polls that say other things. But really reading a poll, the news media always cover, the head-to-head and that, but it's really what you want to do is you look at the smaller numbers. One of the most important things any pollster will tell you is you look at the direction. Do people think that the state is going in a good direction or not? So even if that's how we knew that Craig Benson was in trouble in 2004, although poll after poll showed him significantly ahead of John Lynch, the numbers of the state going in the right direction were bad. And now I think it's 3-1 the people of New Hampshire think that the state is heading in the right direction. It might not be where they want it to be at this point. They don't. Obviously, nobody wants any unemployment. Nobody wants any of the economic downturn. And in the national level as well, the economy, as you saw, the jobs that were killed under the previous administration has turned around. We've stopped losing jobs. In fact, 170,000, I believe, last month were added to the rolls. And obviously, nobody wants anyone unemployed, and that's not good enough. But you can see that the economic package that the president put into place, just like President Clinton back in '93, we seem to have Democratic presidents cleaning up after Bush's, that they've turned the economy around, and we look forward. I'm very excited and very bullish on this election. I think we're going to do very well here in New Hampshire and across the country.
Chairman Sununu, the Obama factor, what do you see?
Well, I sure hope you believe everything you're saying, Ray. Look, I find it interesting to hear rationalizations like this. I always go into an election assuming that there is nothing good going to happen and you have to work as hard as you can. And I guarantee you the Republicans in this state are doing that. We did win 7 out of 8 special elections. That's not enough. We intend to really clean house in November. I find it interesting that the only poll Ray really quoted was the one taken 2 days after the health care bill passed. He hasn't quoted any of the recent ones which show the return of dislike to where it was before the bill passed. There are 2 groups that we focus on in terms of polling for this election in 2010. I'm happy to hear the Democrats are all excited again. I hope you stay excited. But what we're worried about are the Republicans and the independents. The Republicans are energized. And surprisingly enough, the independents are energized towards Republicans. The fact is that in the elections in Virginia, the elections in New Jersey, in the polling data recently, not a while ago, recently, the independents are expressing anger at the arrogance involved in the health care bill, the process in there, the lack of transparency, the broken promises. They're upset at the cost. They're upset at the growth of government, the intrusion of government, big spending, and big taxes. All of those things come together. You asked how the president will play out. I really urge you to have the president come up here and campaign for Democrats. It'll make the 2010 election even easier for Republicans.
Well, Governor, let's handicap it for a minute. Do you believe when the dust settles this November that the Republican Party will hold the majority in the House, the Senate, corner office, both congressional seats, the Senate race? Are you going to have a clean sweep win?
I think if you want to bet right now, I'll put the money on the table and tell you that we are going to clean house in New Hampshire. Yes, sir.
How much money?
$100. $100.
100,000?
$100.
Oh. Okay, $100.
What we'll do is we'll add how many seats change hands, right? And then whoever gains the most seats wins the bet, right?
As long as the check is written out to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, it's fine with me.
I just want to say that there's no gambling in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
I give you 8-5, you're wrong.
Chairman Buckley, your predictions for the state races for this fall?
Listen, in 2004, the state of New Hampshire was the only state that went from Bush to a Democrat. In 2004, New Hampshire was the only state that defeated an incumbent Republican governor running for re-election and regained seats in the House, the Executive Council, and the State Senate. In 2006, beyond my wildest dreams, we won everything. We won both congressional seats. We won the governors by the largest margin in New Hampshire history. Sorry, and we won the majority of the Executive Council, the majority in the House and the Senate, and picked up county races in every single district. And in 2008, we kept it all. First time in New Hampshire history. Now, every once in a while, we've had majorities here and majorities there, but back-to-back, unheard of. Unheard of. So we held everything in 2006, carried the state by the largest margin of any Democratic presidential nominee, and we picked up a U.S. Senate seat. For the first time in my lifetime, I voted for somebody who actually was sworn into the U.S. Senate. From 1975 until this year, no Democrat, no matter who was running, what the race was, no Democrat was elected to the U.S. Senate. Now, is it likely, after the pickups in 2004, the running of the table of 2006, and the running of the table again, plus, in 2008, are we going to do all of this again? Well, I certainly believe that we can. I certainly believe that we will. But the likelihood that New Hampshire has so dramatically changed to be such a completely Democratic state that the Republicans never are going to win anything anywhere, I think that that would be probably, although wishful thinking on my part, I think it would be unrealistic.
I knew you didn't believe all the garbage you were throwing out.
Chairman Buckley, what do you make of the Tea Party movement, and what impact do you see that having on the elections?
Well, I think that different states, it will have different impacts. Here in New Hampshire are unlike other states. Nationally, if you saw the poll that was taken of those who were active in the Tea Party movement, 14% of those active in the Tea Party movement nationally actually consider themselves Democrats, with another like 30-40% independents. 8% of those involved in the Tea Party nationally consider themselves liberal. And with a significant number of moderates. So there's all sorts of reasons why people join the Tea Party movement, whether they're angry, and who wouldn't be angry after the economic collapse under the Bush administration, the wasting of trillions of dollars in an unnecessary war, on and on. There are all sorts of reasons why people are angry out there. And that because of an election didn't immediately turn everything around, what people don't remember is how close we were to the ledge. The fall of 2008 could have destroyed this country. But due to the bipartisan work with President Bush and in the general, during the fall and afterwards with President Obama, we were able to bring this country back. Is it where we need to go? Absolutely not. So I understand the anger out there. There are a lot of people that should be angry. If you're unemployed, why wouldn't you be angry? If you see you've lost your home, why wouldn't you be angry? If you see that you're not able to provide the education you wanted for your children because of the economic collapse, why wouldn't you be angry? Of course that you are angry. Now, that's nationally. What's interesting here in the state of New Hampshire is you go on to nhtparty.org, I believe it is, and you look at the links. It's the Concord Republican City Committee. It's the Manchester Republican City Committee. It's the Stratford County Republican. It is a wholly involved subsidiary of the Republican State Party. The Democrats and progressives, or even moderates, I don't think are as welcome into the New Hampshire Tea Party movement as they should be. And I was discouraged when I saw that list, because I'll tell you, the reason the Democrats were so successful in 2006 and in 2008 was the anger and the frustration of what was going on in Washington. And that's where the Tea Party movement came from. I understand it. I would have hoped that that cooler heads may have been involved in originating the New Hampshire Tea Party, so that they really could have a bipartisan movement, which it does happen across the country.
Chairman Sununu, the Tea Party, what impact will it have?
Well, I think the movement is a bunch of folks who are really upset at the growth of government. They see bigger spending, they see bigger taxes, they see what they perceive as a socializing of this country as the government takes over the healthcare business, as the government tries to reach into all kinds of private sector entities. They see an aggressive reach by government trying to abuse business. I don't know how many of you are upset or not about Henry Waxman having the gall to call in AT&T and Deere and Caterpillar because under the accounting rules that they're obliged to do, they had to take a loss on account of the health care bill. If you don't think that's intimidation, if you don't think that's abuse of power, if you don't think having a committee chairman in Congress try and intimidate private sector CEOs, if you don't think that's wrong, then you have a problem. And that's the arrogance that's involved here that is causing the anger amongst the Tea Party folks. Now, they're going to go their own way, and they should. They're going to operate as independents. There used to be a joke about a bumper sticker that said, "Iconoclasts of the world unite." They're not going to unite. They're going to go their own way. All we have asked the Tea Party folks to do is to vote for the truly most fiscally conservative candidate in every election. Vote for the candidate that wants to reduce size of government. Vote for the candidate that wants to reduce spending and taxes. And if that's the message Republicans give across the country, they're going to get the majority of that vote. And I really do think that you're seeing a lot of whistling past the graveyard by Democratic state chairmen in New Hampshire and across the country, and the democratically inclined press that is trying to pretend that they might go the other way.
There's been a lot of change in the most recent election cycles, especially here in New Hampshire. We've bounced around quite a bit. So the same question for both of you. What, in your mind, is New Hampshire's political identity right now? Are we a red state? Are we blue? Are we purple? What is our political identity right now?
Well, I know half the crowd wants me to say pink, but that was a good joke. I know some of you were at the bar. I know some of you were at the bar. Now, come on. Look at no matter whether it becomes, as Andy Smith projects, in 10 to 15 years, a solid blue state. One would consider Rhode Island or Vermont or Maine, or to an extent Massachusetts, a blue state as well, or Connecticut. There's Republican governors in Vermont, in Rhode Island and Connecticut, Republican U.S. senators in Massachusetts and in Maine, both of them, and on and on. Now, there might obviously not any Republican members of Congress at this point. But no matter where we are, I don't think we're ever going to go back to the one-party rule where any Republican signing up in June could presume that they were going to win. Now, that wasn't too many years ago where they were able to do that. If nothing else, this state now, everyone is going to be held accountable. Every candidate running for office. And if you look at the demographics of either the legislative seats or the state Senate seats or congressional or whatnot, that you're able to see that that any one of these seats with the right candidate, the right message, the right year, could potentially go one way or another. This is a very independent state now. I don't think it's a red state or a blue state. I think it's a state where people want to be able to have choices. And I think that this is good for the state of New Hampshire, that all the action isn't just in the Republican primary, though there seems to be a lot of action going on in the Republican primary now, that actually voting in November is going to have a meaning instead of just going in and rubber stamping. There was a significant difference. I was looking at the numbers the other day of when Governor Sununu was running for the first time in 1982, of where we were as a state politically. The Republican Party, and because I was wondering, why does he always just seem to be whipping up the base and not really... I think back in 1980, 1982, that's what you could do. There was upwards to 46, 47% of the electorate were registered Republicans. But now that the Republican Party is down at 29%, you need to have more than just Republicans, and you need to reach out. And I think that's a good thing, that neither party can just get elected on its own by just having its base support, because that's going to make sure that we have accountable elected officials at every level. So I think it's... I guess the term is purple state now, and I think it probably will be for a number of years, and I welcome that. I think that's a good thing.
Chairman Sununu?
Yeah, I think what this state is going to be depends on two realities that are going to occur over the next year or two or three. One is the Democratic Party is going to look at itself, and the traditional New Hampshire Democratic Party is going to say, is the Democratic Party we have the leadership in our Democratic Party today, representative of the Democratic Party I remember, from Crowley, who ran against Mel Thompson, Governor King, Tom McIntyre, Norm DeMoore, Syl Dupuis. These are fiscally conservative Democrats that were committed to sound fiscal management. And you don't see that in this Democratic Party. And I think the Democrats that are out there as voters are going to have to take a good hard look and decide whether they want to stay with the party. And on the other group that has to make a decision is the group that's here tonight, the business community of this state, who, in my opinion, for the last decade have said there's no difference and have gone along and voted for a nice personality instead of a real policy. And if you continue to do that, then the state will be a purple state. But if you wake up in the morning and say, you know, I don't like the LLC tax, and I don't like somebody trying to tell me it's closing a loophole, and I don't like the idea that they're trying to double tax business and jobs in this state by taking the BET deduction away and trying to tax me both for BPT and BET. And when you look at the campground tax and the increase of the room and meals tax, and every one of those other taxes, the taxes on your semis, the taxes on increasing your corporate cars and all of that, and take a look at how the climate has changed, if you stay benign and non-committed to good policies, the state will probably become a purple state. But if you wake up and recognize there is a difference in policies, then the state, in my opinion, will go back to being a red state.
My last question to the both of you focuses on the New Hampshire budget situation. Robin mentioned it in her opening statement about the Chamber's position on certain issues, and I think that the business leaders in this audience would love for the two of you to use your legislative experiences between the two of you to campaign for things that business supporters are obviously pressing for in this session. We are facing a deficit. Decisions are about to be announced and soon to be made by the legislature on how to bring the budget back into balance. Would the two of you be willing to pledge opposition to the LLC tax for a full repeal and an end of the conversation about things like fair compensation? This group, I'm sure, would like to know if business taxes can stay off the table, and also in your summary about where you would be willing to go. At what point do the cuts get too deep? And at what point do we start talking about a new tax proposal, such as perhaps an income tax or a sales tax? Anything that you want in all of that. But what would your advice be to the governor, to the legislature, and what positions would you be willing to take on these issues?
Who do you want to start?
Go ahead, Governor.
Look, those are easy commitments to make. If you want to know how far back you can cut, all you have to do is look at the states around the country. They cut back 2.5% in this budget. Bring this budget spending back to even. Take a 2.5% margin on the spending side. You can cut it back to there. Cut. What happened just a week ago? In the House committee, they passed unanimously $47 million of Republican cuts as proposed by Sherm Packard and the Republicans in the House. What happened? No leadership from the governor on it, and the liberal leadership in the House decided that even though their committee that they controlled voted unanimously to have those $47 million in cuts, they defeated it. Don't believe that we are spending. Don't believe we are overspending because we have to. We are overspending because there is no leadership to cut it back to where it should be. I make an absolute commitment, and I tell you, I know Sherm Packard and Peter Bragdon well enough to say they join me in saying we ought to at least cut it back to zero growth in spending in this budget. Secondly, the LLC tax has to be repealed. John Lynch has to come to his senses and push the House and Senate to do the right thing. The Senate did it, and the House is now dragging its feet. You, as members of the business community, have to take some leadership. It's nice for you to say, well, I don't think we supported it last time. Oppose it vehemently. Because if you don't, you are going to lose your supporting small business. They're going to move out. For the last 3 years, more people have moved out of the state than have moved in. That's a travesty. Cut spending, cut taxes, bring back fiscal responsibility in the spirit of the old-time Democrats and the Republican Party in this state. Let's restore New Hampshire. Let's not be satisfied with being 4th or 5th in per capita taxes. Let's get us back to where we used to be, first and the lowest in per capita taxes, and that's by showing some discipline on the budget side.
Chairman Buckley?
I believe that by the end of the session that the LLC tax will be repealed. Clearly, there were a number of unintended consequences and loopholes that were created but because of some investigation of that, I think that it will be repealed by the end. No, there's not going to be an income tax in the state of New Hampshire. No, there's not going to be a sales tax in the state of New Hampshire. Now, look at how Governor Sununu keeps talking about these 41 taxes, and I know that's talking points, but the other day I was debating somebody that was representing Governor Sununu, but he was saying 60 taxes, and then a couple of weeks ago I had another Republican say it was 20 taxes. Y'all need to kind of figure out how many taxes you're going to, if you're going to make up a story.
You hid them so well, we're having trouble finding them all.
But the reality is all you have to do is look back at how Republicans reacted to hard times that were nowhere near the challenge of this. And when Doug Scanlon was Speaker in 1990, he left the podium and he went down and he asked for really 41 tax increases. And he says, nobody likes to raise taxes, but we all today must be statesmen and we must raise every single one of these taxes. That's what Doug Scanlon, that's what Republican leadership in an economic decline that was nowhere near what we were facing this last couple of years. Then you go to the next, that was under Governor Gregg. Then the next cycle under Governor Merrill. And at that time, one of the greatest economic challenges, what was Steve Merrill's response? To create the BET tax, a tax on your losses. So when Governor Sununu talks about raising taxes and this and that, the reality is that there will never be a deficit at the end of the year as long as John Lynch is governor, unlike when Governor Sununu was in office, and he did leave a deficit at the end.
That is a lie, and I brought the document to prove it because you've been going around this state saying that. And I am sick and tired of your stupidity in not being able to read the state document. There are 6 surpluses there, my friend, every single year, and you've been putting it online. You've been telling people this. You've been saying it. You have staff members that are sending it out as news releases. And I'm tired of the fact that you're not smart enough to read a state document. There's the document.
Well, actually, Governor, I have the real state document on my desk. I didn't know we were bringing
This is the state of New Hampshire table of undesignated fund balances. That's the real state document.
Now, are you going to bring paper saying that you didn't have an average of 22% increases?
No, I
spending?
increased spending because we had revenue coming in and we had to rebuild the infrastructure. We rebuilt the state hospital. We rebuilt the prison. We built a prison for women. We put a 10-year highway plan in place. We built all the infrastructure that had been neglected.
But you failed to fund Augenblick. And if you
We
had
didn't fail to fund
funded Augenblick, $50 million back when you were governor,
all
of these years of being, it's the truth, Governor.
We funded Augenblick and funded all the communities
You're the
that
only
were
person
the
that
low.
believes that.
I know it. I want to make one more point. Politics in New Hampshire has become rather distasteful in the last 6 years. They savaged Craig Benson because Craig made it easy for them to do that, but they savaged him. Governor Lynch goes around this state looking like a nice guy. But he has Ray, he has Miss Sullivan, Peter Burling. They savaged the candidates. You heard what he did to John Stephen at the very beginning here today. Attacked him as being an incompetent. The fact is that we are going through a tough cycle. I do get upset when people misrepresent. I don't like having my record misrepresented. I don't like listening to them misrepresent John Stevens' record. And I urge you to understand that what comes out of the Democratic Party is at the direction of the leader of the Democratic Party, John Lynch. It never happens that a governor who is sitting does not have control of his party and does not have control of the spokesman. So if you go and vote for somebody because you think they're a nice guy, I suggest to you, you see what their party has done in communicating. This state used to be a state where campaigns were civilized. This used to be a state where you could run for office without getting savaged. We would like to see it like that again. But I have the feeling that what we're going to see in this cycle is the same thing we saw in 2004, 2006, and 2008, when tons of money came in from out of state and savaged candidates across the board. It's not too late for the climate to change. We had, as Ray has pointed out, a lot of Republicans entering primaries. And every time a significant Republican entered a primary, the attack machine started and savaged them with releases out there, attacking them for all kinds of alleged personal flaws. Let's argue about issues. Let's argue about facts. Let's argue about positions. Let's argue about results. Let's argue about what has or hasn't happened to the state. But let's not savage individuals' character in the campaign. That happened in 2004. It happened in 2006. It happened in 2008. And I'm just going to tell you, Ray, if you guys start doing that again to Republicans, I'm not shy. And it's going to happen to the leader of your party as well.
Well, Governor.
Chairman Buckley, some final thoughts?
Perhaps you were engaged in that special election up in Carroll County, but the personal destruction of Judge Martin by your party, and you were the state party chair, that was about as disgusting as I've ever seen. So you can say one thing in front of them, but in reality it's not true. And remember, I was around in 1982. I remember what you did to Hugh Gallen in the general election of 1982. So you can act all innocent now, but I remember those campaigns that you were involved in. So the problem is that John Sununu isn't used to a Democratic Party that stands back up to the sort of politics that has been run rampant here in the state of New Hampshire. And we are going to stand up. We learned that in 2002 after phone jamming. Kathy Sullivan and I and a number of us got together at the state party and said, never again. You know, the problem is that they don't care. They don't care if they steal election. They don't care if they make sure that people can't vote. They don't care what they say. This is all about winning elections with them. And if we're going to start getting this party back on track, we're going to have to stand up to them. And that's what we do. And I know John Sununu doesn't like it, and I know a lot of Republicans don't like it. But the reality is, you start going personal, we respond. And that's the way it is, because we're not going to be the patsies to the Republican Party in the state of New Hampshire ever again.
Gentlemen, I'd like to try to finish with a light question. Are the two of you still having fun, and do you both plan to run for re-election as the chairman of your respective parties?
I always have fun.
Okay.
And once we clean house in November, I suspect somebody else will come in and take over.
Mr. Buckley?
This is a job that I wake up every morning so excited that I have an opportunity. As a little kid, I dreamt that someday maybe I would be the state party chair. I never dreamt growing up in the 70s here in New Hampshire that we would be the majority party and that we would hold every elective office that has been on the ballot in several cycles. This is an exciting time to be in New Hampshire. This is an exciting time to be an American. This is an historic time. When I go around the country and I talk to the young Democrats, and I say, you know, I heard my grandparents talk about how Franklin Roosevelt changed the country and how he inspired a nation to rise up and work together. And then I heard my parents and my aunts and uncles talking about when John F. Kennedy was elected president and how he changed. And now to have this generation to see President Obama, who is taking on the toughest of tough fights and standing up very strong. So I'm very proud of the work of President Obama in Washington, of the Democratic majorities, and certainly here in New Hampshire. Little did I believe that this state would have progressed so quickly in the state of New Hampshire. I suspect that those a couple of thousand folks that are leaving New Hampshire are those folks that had come in the last decade who thought this was some sort of redneck nirvana. And then they realized that New Hampshire isn't Idaho. New Hampshire isn't Utah. New Hampshire is not Montana. And that this is not where they're going to travel. You had all those people coming in from Texas and all over thinking that this is the Wild West of politics up here. And it's not. That we have respectable and thinking people here, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents. And so I'm very excited to serve as state party chair. As long as they will have me, I will continue doing this. I think our state party is doing amazing. I thought back the other day of when Governor Sununu was running in 1982 and was elected governor. The state party of New Hampshire, Democratic State Party, can anyone guess how many employees they had? Zero. There was nobody employed by the New Hampshire Democratic Party in 1982 in the state party office. It was 3 rooms on a 3rd floor walk-up, which is now Citizens Bank on the 3rd floor. We now have a staff of 18 and a budget of $1 million a year, and we're just in the process of finalizing the purchase of the state employees. We have the most amazing voter file. And the information that we can give and provide to our candidates are so far superior. We didn't have anything like that back in 1982. And so although Governor Sununu may wish that this is going to be a wipeout of Democrats, I just don't think that's ever going to happen again in the state of New Hampshire.
Let me just close with this. I'm glad Ray acknowledged that he and Kathy Sullivan deliberately went into the attack mode in 2004. It's exactly what I was trying to tell you, that from that day on, we ended up with a discord in politics that really does not have to be there. But the last point I want to make is I just ask all of you to be part of the process. The most important thing in the 2010 election cycle is that it not be decided by a small fraction of the voters, but all the voters. You may like what Ray has said. You may like what I have said. Whichever one you like, whichever one you support, go out and talk to your friends and your neighbors, your employees and your associates about. Get them to come out on this election in 2010. I have a suspicion that as this process goes on, and as people pay more and more attention to what changes have taken in New Hampshire, they will begin to understand why I've been going around saying the Democrats are ruining the state of New Hampshire. And if they pay attention to what's going on in Washington, they will understand why what is upsetting so many people is that the Democrats are bankrupting America. Whichever position you agree with, talk to your friends, get them involved, and please, let's have the largest turnout we've ever had in 2010.
Chairman Buckley, Chairman Sununu,
I certainly support a high turnout, because every time we have a high turnout, we win. So I'm all for that.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate your indulgence for letting us run a little overtime. I'd like to turn things back over to Robin for a couple of final words. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank Scott Spradling, the Spradling Group, Governor Sununu, thank you so much. Chairman Buckley, thank you so much. Fidelity and National Grid. Have a great, great night. Enjoy the warm weather.